Have you ever wondered what secret could be so dangerous that an entire military operation would be rewritten in the middle of a battlefield just because of what a small dog carried on his vest? What if I told you that on a freezing morning in 1944, in the forests of Virginia, a Jack Russell Terrier named Whistler emerged from a burning Sherman tank carrying something that would change the course of American military intelligence forever, and that the contents of that leather pouch would reveal a conspiracy so deep that even today, 80 years later, the Pentagon refuses to declassify the complete files. Before we dive into this story that will shake everything you thought you knew about World War II on American soil, I need you to do something crucial. First, comment below where you're watching from. This helps us understand who's finding this hidden content. Then hit that subscribe button, because this channel depends on your support to keep bringing these secret stories to light. Stories that powerful people don't want you to know. Your subscription might be the only thing keeping these truths alive. The morning of November 16, 1944, began like any other at the Black Ridge Military Training Facility in the dense forests of southwestern Virginia, near the border with Kentucky. The compound, officially designated as Field Station Victor 7, was carved into 3,000 acres of mountainous terrain, far from civilian eyes, far from questions. It was a place where the United States Army trained its most elite tank crews and tested experimental warfare tactics in complete secrecy. But Black Ridge was different from other training facilities. While places like Fort Knox focused on conventional armor training, Black Ridge specialized in what military documents vaguely referred to as Special Integration Protocols. These protocols involved something the Army had been experimenting with since 1942, something that combined canine intelligence units with armored warfare in ways that defied every convention of military doctrine. Sergeant Wallace Tucker had been stationed at Black Ridge for 11 months when Whistler entered his life. Tucker, a 32-year-old tank commander from Savannah, Georgia, had earned his reputation in North Africa, where his crew had destroyed 14 enemy tanks in 6 months of brutal desert warfare. His reward for survival was reassignment to Black Ridge, which he initially considered a demotion, a way to sideline a soldier who had seen too much, who asked too many questions about the bodies that didn't match the reports. He was wrong about the demotion. The program at Black Ridge, officially called Operation Sentinel Eye, was unlike anything the U.S. military had ever attempted. It involved training small, agile dogs, specifically Jack Russell Terriers and similar breeds, to operate inside tanks during combat. Not as mascots, not for morale, but as living reconnaissance systems equipped with specially designed vests that contained miniature cameras, communication devices, and according to some rumors that Tucker heard whispered in the barracks at night, something else. Something that involved frequencies and signals that human ears couldn't detect. Whistler arrived on a cold morning in January of 1944, delivered in a wooden crate by 2 men in dark suits who didn't wear military insignia. The dog was small, maybe 15 pounds, with white fur marked by brown patches around his left eye and right ear. His eyes were disturbingly intelligent. Too intelligent, Tucker thought when he first looked into them. It was like looking at something that understood far more than a dog should. The training regimen was intense and bizarre. Whistler learned to navigate the cramped interior of a Sherman tank, to recognize specific sound patterns from the engine that indicated mechanical problems before human operators could detect them, and to move through the tank's hatches with remarkable speed. But the strangest part of the training involved the vest. The vest was made of dark brown leather, custom-fitted to Whistler's small frame, with multiple pockets and compartments. Tucker was never told what went into all of those compartments. His commanding officer, Colonel Raymond Dietrich, a thin man with hollow eyes who chain-smoked Lucky Strikes and never seemed to sleep, told Tucker only what he needed to know to complete the mission parameters. "The dog is your early warning system," Dietrich said during one of their briefings in the underground bunker that served as Black Ridge's command center. "If something goes wrong, if your tank is compromised, Whistler gets out first. Whatever is in that vest gets out first. Your life is secondary to that objective. Do you understand, Sergeant?" Tucker said he understood, even though he didn't. Not really. Not then. The months of training built an unusual bond between Tucker and Whistler. The dog slept in Tucker's barracks, ate from Tucker's rations, and accompanied him everywhere except when Colonel Dietrich summoned Whistler for what he called special conditioning sessions. Those sessions took place in Laboratory 4, a concrete building on the eastern edge of the compound that had no windows and only one door, which was guarded around the clock by soldiers Tucker didn't recognize. Soldiers who wore standard U.S. Army uniforms but had serial numbers that didn't match any database Tucker could access. Tucker tried asking other tank commanders about their dogs, about what happened in Laboratory 4. Most gave him vague answers or changed the subject. But one night in October, a corporal named Billy Lewiston from Mississippi, drunk on bourbon he'd smuggled onto the base, told Tucker something that made his blood run cold. "My dog came back different," Lewiston said, his words slurred, his eyes unfocused. "After they took him to Lab 4 for 3 days. Came back and wouldn't look at me the same way. Started doing things dogs shouldn't know how to do." "What kind of things?" Tucker asked. Lewiston looked around the empty barracks, paranoid despite the late hour. Opening doors, complex doors with latches, operating equipment, and sometimes, man, I swear sometimes he'd just sit there and stare at nothing, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he'd run to a specific spot, and 10 minutes later, something would happen there. An alarm, an announcement, like he knew before it happened. "Where's your dog now?" Tucker asked. Lewiston's face went pale. "They took him 3 weeks ago, said he was being transferred to another facility. But I saw them loading his body into an incinerator truck. Saw them loading 6 other dogs, too. All the dogs from C Battalion." Before Tucker could respond, military police arrived and escorted Lewiston away. Tucker never saw him again. When he asked about Lewiston the next morning, he was told the corporal had been reassigned. When Tucker pushed further, Colonel Dietrich called him into his office and gave him a single warning. "Some questions are career-ending, Sergeant Tucker. Some questions are life-ending. Choose which kind of man you want to be." Tucker chose silence, but he started paying closer attention to Whistler, to the things the dog did when he thought no one was watching. The way Whistler would sometimes freeze mid-motion and tilt his head, like he was receiving instructions from an invisible source. The way he would refuse to enter certain buildings on the base, growling low in his throat at doorways that looked identical to every other doorway. The way he would wake Tucker up at exactly 3:17 every morning, without fail, and stare at him until Tucker acknowledged his presence. Then came November 16th. The operation was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Tucker's crew, consisting of himself, his gunner, Private First Class Eddie Malloy from Boston, his loader, Corporal James Hurst from New Orleans, and his driver, Private Dante Rossi from Brooklyn, were ordered to take their Sherman tank, designation Ghost 7, on a nighttime navigation run through the forest. They were to proceed to Checkpoint Delta, a clearing 12 miles northeast of the main compound, verify a set of coordinates, and return by dawn. Whistler, as always, was secured in his position near the commander's seat, his vest properly fitted and locked, all compartments sealed. Tucker noticed the vest was heavier than usual that night, bulging with whatever Colonel Dietrich's people had loaded into it. When Tucker asked about the extra weight, Dietrich gave him a cold smile. "Just equipment, Sergeant. Very important equipment. Remember your priority if things go wrong." Things went wrong at 2300 hours. Ghost 7 was 7 miles into the forest, navigating a narrow trail between towering pines, when Whistler began to behave strangely. The dog started whining, a high-pitched sound that Tucker had never heard from him before. Then Whistler began pawing frantically at his vest, at one specific pocket on the left side, his claws scraping against the leather with desperate intensity. "Something's wrong with the dog," Malloy called from the gunner's position. Tucker tried to calm Whistler, but the dog was in a state of panic Tucker had never witnessed. Whistler's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and he was salivating excessively, foam forming at the corners of his mouth. Then the dog did something that made Tucker's heart stop. Whistler began to bark. Not normal barking, a pattern. 3 short barks, 2 long, 3 short. Pause. Repeat. Over and over. "That's Morse code," Hurst said, his voice tight with fear. "That's SOS." Before Tucker could process what that meant, before he could understand how a dog could possibly know Morse code, the radio crackled to life. But it wasn't Colonel Dietrich's voice. It wasn't any voice Tucker recognized. The voice was female, speaking in German. "Projekt Wächter ist kompromittiert. Eliminieren Sie alle Zeugen. Keine Überlebenden." The transmission cut off. In the silence that followed, Tucker and his crew stared at each other in the dim red light of the tank's interior. None of them spoke German, but they all understood that something catastrophically wrong had just happened. Then the forest exploded around them. The first shell hit 20 yards to their left, sending up a column of dirt and shattered pine trees. The second hit 30 yards to their right. Someone was bracketing them, finding their range, but that was impossible. They were in the middle of a secured American military reservation, 12 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by checkpoints and patrols. "Evasive maneuvers!" Tucker shouted into the intercom. "Rossi, get us out of here!" Rossi gunned the engine, and Ghost 7 lurched forward, its treads churning through the soft forest floor. But they had barely traveled 50 yards when the third shell hit directly behind them, close enough that the concussion wave slammed Tucker against the turret wall. The explosion ruptured their left track, and Ghost 7 ground to a shuddering halt, tilted at a dangerous angle. "We're immobilized!" Rossi shouted. "Track's gone!" Malloy was already traversing the gun, searching for targets. But there was nothing. The forest was dark, illuminated only by the burning trees from the initial explosions. No muzzle flashes, no engine sounds. Whoever was firing at them was invisible. Whistler was going insane. The dog was throwing himself against Tucker's legs, barking that SOS pattern continuously, his small body vibrating with terror or urgency or something else Tucker couldn't identify. Tucker looked down at the vest, at that bulging left pocket Whistler had been pawing at, and he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He opened the pocket. Inside was a small metal cylinder, about the size of a film canister, with Russian text etched into its surface. Tucker didn't read Russian, but he recognized the symbol stamped into the top of the cylinder. It was the same symbol he'd seen on intelligence briefings about Soviet military operations. The hammer and sickle. "Jesus Christ," Tucker whispered. Another shell hit, closer this time, and Ghost 7's interior lit up with the orange glow of nearby fire. Smoke was beginning to seep through the hatches. They were sitting ducks. Tucker grabbed his radio, ready to call for support, but the radio was dead. No static, no signal, just silence. "We need to abandon!" Malloy was screaming now, barely audible over the sound of another incoming shell. "The ammo's cooking off! We've got maybe 2 minutes before this thing blows." Tucker could feel the heat rising from below, could smell the distinctive acrid scent of burning hydraulic fluid and propellant. Malloy was right. Ghost 7 was about to become a tomb. "Bail out! Everyone out! Now!" His crew needed no further encouragement. Hatches flew open. Rossi went first through the driver's hatch, then Hurst through the loader's position. Malloy was climbing out of the turret when the fourth shell hit. It struck Ghost 7 directly on the right side, penetrating the armor with a sound like reality tearing apart. The interior of the tank became hell. Fire erupted from the ammunition storage, flames filling the crew compartment with instant, terrible heat. Tucker felt his uniform ignite, felt his skin blistering, felt his lungs searing as he inhaled superheated air. He grabbed Whistler. The dog's fur was smoking. Tucker's hands were burning, but he held onto the Terrier, feeling the metal cylinder in the vest pressing against his chest. He had to get Whistler out. That was his mission. That was his priority. The dog and the vest. Whatever secrets that vest contained. Tucker threw himself toward the commander's hatch, pushing through flames, feeling his flesh cooking, smelling his own body burning. He emerged into the cold November night air, his uniform on fire, his hands still clutching Whistler. He rolled on the ground, trying to extinguish himself, and as the flames died, he looked up. His crew was gone. Where Rossi, Hurst, and Malloy had been moments before, there was nothing. No bodies, no blood, just empty forest and the burning hulk of Ghost 7, flames 50 feet high, turning night into day. And in that firelight, Tucker saw them. Figures, moving through the trees. Dozens of them, wearing American uniforms, carrying American weapons. But moving wrong. Coordinating in a way that American soldiers didn't coordinate. Using hand signals Tucker didn't recognize. They were searching. Searching for something. Searching for survivors. Searching for the vest. Tucker pressed himself flat against the cold ground, Whistler squirming in his arms. The dog had stopped barking. Now Whistler was silent, perfectly still, like he understood that any sound would mean death. Tucker's burned hands screamed in agony as he clutched the Terrier, but he didn't let go. He couldn't let go. The figures moved closer. Tucker could hear them speaking now, and his blood turned to ice. They were speaking Russian. Tucker lay motionless in the cold dirt, Whistler pressed against his chest, and listened to enemy soldiers speaking fluent Russian while wearing United States Army uniforms on American soil, in the middle of a supposedly secure military installation in Virginia. His mind struggled to process what his ears were telling him. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. But it was happening. A soldier passed within 10 feet of Tucker's position, close enough that Tucker could see the authentic U.S. Army patches on his uniform, could see the regulation haircut, could see the M1 carbine that was standard issue for American troops. But the words coming from the man's mouth were pure Russian. And Tucker, who had spent 6 months in military intelligence before his transfer to armor, understood enough to know they were coordinating a search pattern. Sector 4 clear. Moving to Sector 5. Primary target not located. Secondary targets eliminated. Secondary targets. Tucker's crew. Rossi, Hurst, Malloy, dead. Eliminated. And these men, whoever they were hunting for the primary target. The vest, the cylinder, Whistler. Tucker waited until the search pattern moved past his position, then he began to crawl. Slowly, inches at a time. His burned hands left smears of blood and charred skin on the forest floor, but he kept moving, kept Whistler silent against his chest, kept breathing despite the agony that filled every cell of his body. He crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, putting distance between himself and Ghost 7's burning wreckage, between himself and the impossible Russian soldiers in American uniforms. When he finally stopped, hidden in a dense thicket of mountain laurel, Tucker allowed himself to examine Whistler more carefully in the dim moonlight that filtered through the canopy. The dog was uninjured, miraculously untouched by the flames that had nearly killed Tucker. But Whistler was different now. The terrier's eyes, always intelligent, now seemed to hold something else, something that looked almost like human understanding, human fear. Tucker opened the vest's left pocket again and carefully removed the metal cylinder. In the moonlight, he could see more details on its surface. The Russian text was accompanied by a series of numbers, 73924. Below that, a date, October 5th, 1943. And below that, stamped in English that made Tucker's blood freeze, property of Black Ridge Station. Field Test Omega. Field Test Omega. Tucker had heard that designation before, whispered in the barracks, mentioned in fragments of conversations that stopped the moment he entered a room. Field Test Omega was supposedly a myth, a paranoid fantasy invented by soldiers who spent too much time in the isolation of Black Ridge. It was the rumor that said some of the personnel at the facility weren't American at all, that there was a program within the program, a shadow operation that used Black Ridge as a cover for something else entirely. Tucker had dismissed those rumors as conspiracy nonsense. Until now. He unscrewed the cylinder's cap with trembling, burned fingers. Inside was a tightly rolled piece of paper, so thin it was almost translucent. Tucker carefully unrolled it, angling it toward the moonlight. The document was covered in what looked like chemical formulas and diagrams, but at the top, in precise typewritten English, was a header that made Tucker's heart nearly stop. Neurological frequency, mapping, canine to human transmission protocol. Test Series Omega. Black Ridge Station in cooperation with NKVD Research Division. Classification, beyond top secret. Below that, in smaller text, a paragraph that Tucker read 3 times before his mind could accept what it was saying. Subject animals exposed to modulated radio frequencies demonstrate capacity for enhanced cognitive function and behavioral prediction. Human operators exposed to secondary transmission through prolonged contact with prepared subjects show measurable increases in tactical precognition and threat assessment capability. Recommendation: expand program to full military integration. Note: elimination of test subjects required after 90-day exposure period to prevent irreversible psychological contamination of handlers. Tucker looked at Whistler. The dog looked back at him with those 2 intelligent eyes. 90-day exposure period. Tucker had been with Whistler for 10 months. The other handlers, the ones whose dogs had been incinerated, had all been at 90 days or close to it. "Jesus Christ," Tucker whispered. "They were never training war dogs. They were using you to experiment on us." Whistler made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Then the dog did something that made Tucker's skin crawl. Whistler carefully reached up with one paw and touched the document, touched it in a specific spot, a section of the text that Tucker had skipped over. Tucker read where Whistler was pointing. Warning: recent intelligence indicates potential compromise of Black Ridge Station by unknown foreign actors. Recommend immediate sanitization of all Omega subjects and destruction of primary research data. Soviet NKVD partnership suspected of unauthorized data collection. Trust no one. Verify all personnel through Protocol 7 before any sensitive operations. The date on that addendum was November 14th, 1944. 2 days ago. 2 days before Tucker's crew had been sent on their supposed routine training mission. They had been sent out to die. Tucker and his crew had been sent into the forest to be eliminated, to be sanitized, because they knew too much, because they had been exposed to whatever the hell the Omega program was doing to their minds through prolonged contact with the dogs, and the attack, the Russian-speaking soldiers in American uniforms. That was the sanitization. That was Protocol 7. But something had gone wrong. The people running the sanitization hadn't expected Tucker to survive, hadn't expected Whistler to escape with the cylinder that proved everything, the cylinder that could expose the entire conspiracy. Tucker had to get out of Black Ridge, had to get this evidence to someone, anyone, who could stop whatever was happening at the facility. But who could he trust? If Russian agents had infiltrated deep enough to wear American uniforms and operate on the base, if they were working in cooperation with elements of the U.S. military on this Omega program, then anyone could be compromised. Anyone could be part of it. He looked at Whistler again. The dog was staring north toward the perimeter of the Black Ridge Reservation. Tucker understood. They had to run, had to get beyond the facility's boundaries, had to reach civilian authorities in the nearest town. That was Ashford, a small mining community about 15 miles northwest. If Tucker could make it there, if he could reach the county sheriff or a telephone, he might be able to get word to military investigators, to someone outside the conspiracy. Tucker started moving north through the forest, Whistler padding silently beside him. The Terrier moved with uncanny precision through the darkness, never stepping on dry branches, never making unnecessary sound. Several times, Whistler stopped suddenly, and moments later, Tucker would hear footsteps or voices in the direction they had been heading. Each time, Whistler would lead them on a detour, finding paths that avoided the search parties. It was impossible. No dog could navigate that precisely, could predict patrol patterns that accurately. But Whistler was doing it, and Tucker remembered the document's words. Behavioral prediction. Enhanced cognitive function. Whatever they had done to Whistler in Laboratory 4, whatever frequencies they had exposed him to, it had changed the dog into something that could sense things no animal should be able to sense. They traveled for 3 hours through the forest, moving steadily north. Tucker's burns were agony with every movement, but adrenaline and terror kept him moving. Twice they had to hide while patrols passed within feet of their position. Both times, the soldiers were speaking Russian, coordinating their search in a language that shouldn't exist on American soil. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky when Whistler suddenly stopped at the edge of a clearing. Tucker crouched beside him, looking out at what lay ahead. It was a road, a civilian road. Beyond the road, Tucker could see the fence line that marked the boundary of Black Ridge Station. They were almost out, but the road wasn't empty. 3 military trucks were parked across the pavement, forming a roadblock. Soldiers in American uniforms stood guard, checking papers from the few civilian vehicles that were trying to pass through. Tucker watched as a farmer in an old Ford was turned back, told the road was closed for military exercises. The farmer argued briefly, then drove away. Tucker realized with sinking despair that they had sealed the entire perimeter. No one was getting in or out of Black Ridge. The sanitization wasn't just targeting the Omega handlers. They were locking down the entire facility, probably preparing to eliminate anyone who might have seen or heard something suspicious. Whistler tugged at Tucker's pant leg with his teeth, pulling him back into the tree line. The dog led him east, parallel to the fence, for another half-mile until they reached a section where a small stream ran under the perimeter fence through a culvert. The culvert was maybe 2 feet in diameter, barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. But it was their only option. Tucker went first, army crawling through the culvert's ice-cold water, feeling the burned skin on his hands and face screaming as the water touched it. Whistler followed, swimming easily through the shallow stream. They emerged on the other side of the fence, outside Black Ridge's boundaries, on civilian land for the first time in 11 months. Tucker allowed himself 30 seconds to catch his breath, then started moving west toward Ashford. They were 3 miles from the town when Whistler stopped again, this time with a low growl that Tucker had learned meant immediate danger. Tucker dropped flat, pulling Whistler down with him, just as a vehicle rounded the bend in the dirt road ahead. It was a black sedan, civilian make, but Tucker recognized the 2 men inside. They were from Black Ridge. Military intelligence, the same men who had delivered Whistler in that wooden crate back in January. They were driving slowly, scanning the sides of the road, searching. Tucker pressed himself into the drainage ditch beside the road, covering Whistler with his body. The sedan passed within 20 feet, close enough that Tucker could hear the men talking through the open windows. "Colonel says Tucker's probably dead, but we check anyway. Can't have any loose ends with the Ashford cleanup starting tomorrow." "What about the civilians? How many?" "Whole town, 237 people. Make it look like a mine collapse, gas leak, something natural. Orders from Washington." "Washington? Jesus! How high does this go?" "High enough that we don't ask questions. Just do the job and collect our pay. The Soviets are paying triple for this level of containment." The sedan continued down the road and disappeared around another bend. Tucker lay in the ditch, his mind reeling. They were going to kill everyone in Ashford. 237 innocent Americans murdered to cover up whatever Omega was. And orders from Washington meant this conspiracy reached to the highest levels of government. Tucker started shaking, not from cold, but from the sheer enormity of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't just a rogue operation. This was institutional. This was coordinated at a level that made resistance seem impossible. How do you fight something that has the power to order the massacre of an entire town and make it look like an accident? Whistler licked Tucker's face, bringing him back from the edge of paralysis. The dog's eyes held that strange intelligence again, and Tucker understood what Whistler was trying to communicate. They couldn't stop this alone. They couldn't save Ashford by themselves, but they could expose it. They could get evidence to the right people, people outside the conspiracy. But who? Who could Tucker trust with information this explosive? The answer came to him like a revelation. Senator Harold Jameson. Tucker had read about Jameson in the newspaper. The senator from Tennessee was investigating allegations of Soviet infiltration in American military programs. He had been publicly critical of intelligence agencies operating without congressional oversight. If anyone would believe Tucker's story, if anyone had the power and willingness to act on it, it would be Jameson. But Jameson was in Washington, D.C., 700 miles away. Tucker had no money, no identification that wouldn't immediately flag him in the system, and a massive manhunt was probably already underway for him and Whistler. Getting to Washington seemed impossible. Then Tucker remembered something. The railroad. There was a freight yard in Bluefield, West Virginia, about 40 miles northwest. Tucker had grown up in Savannah during the Depression, had ridden the rails as a teenager looking for work. He knew how to hop a freight train heading north. It was dangerous, especially with his injuries, but it was their only option. Tucker and Whistler spent the next 2 days moving cross-country, avoiding roads, stealing food from farmhouses at night, drinking from streams. Tucker's burns became infected, fever setting in on the second day. He was delirious half the time, hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. But Whistler kept him moving, kept pulling him forward, kept him focused. on the goal. On the third day, they reached the Bluefield freight yard. Tucker waited until nightfall, then approached the lines of freight cars being assembled for the northbound run. He found a boxcar with an open door, climbed inside with the last of his strength, and pulled Whistler up after him. They hid behind crates of machine parts as the train lurched into motion, beginning the long journey toward Washington. Tucker passed out shortly after the train left the yard. When he woke, it was daylight, and someone was standing over him. Tucker's hand went to the pistol he'd taken from Ghost 7 before abandoning the tank, but the man raised his hands peacefully. "Easy, soldier. I'm not with them." The man was old, maybe 60, with a weathered face and intelligent eyes. He wore the rough clothes of a hobo, but he spoke with an educated accent, something Tucker immediately noticed. "Who are you?" Tucker asked, his voice hoarse from days without water. "Name's Harrington. Dr. Malcolm Harrington, formerly of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Currently unemployed and on the run, much like yourself." Tucker's hand didn't leave his pistol. "Oak Ridge, the nuclear research facility." Harrington nodded slowly. "I worked on the Manhattan Project, specifically on research into radiation's effects on neurological function, until I discovered that some of my research was being diverted, shared with people it shouldn't have been shared with, foreign nationals. When I reported it through proper channels, my superiors told me to forget what I'd seen. When I refused, well, let's just say I became persona non grata very quickly." Tucker studied the man carefully. "Why are you on this train?" "Same reason you are, I suspect. Running from people who want me dead? Because I know too much. I saw you and your dog board last night, saw your burns, saw the way you move, like every shadow might contain an assassin. Recognized a fellow fugitive from impossible circumstances." Tucker made a decision. He was dying. The infection in his burns was spreading. He could feel it in his bones, in his blood. If he was going to die, someone else needed to know the truth. Someone else needed to carry the evidence forward. He told Harrington everything. About Blackridge, about Omega, about the dogs and the frequency experiments, and the Russian infiltration, and the planned massacre in Ashford. He showed Harrington the cylinder and the document inside. Harrington's face grew paler with each revelation. "Dear God," Harrington whispered when Tucker finished. "It's worse than I thought. Much worse. The research I was doing at Oak Ridge, they were using it. Using radiation to enhance the frequency modulation effects. They were trying to create a weapon, not a bomb. Something more subtle. A way to control human cognitive function through animal intermediaries." "Why?" Tucker asked. "What's the point?" Harrington looked at Whistler, who sat perfectly still, watching their conversation with those unsettling eyes. "Imagine an army where every soldier is connected to a network of enhanced animals. Dogs, birds, whatever. Each animal sensing threats before they happen, predicting enemy movements, communicating that information directly into the soldiers' nervous systems through frequencies below conscious perception. You'd have units that could anticipate ambushes, avoid traps, coordinate perfectly without radio communication that could be intercepted." "That's science fiction," Tucker said. But even as he said it, he remembered the things Whistler had done, the way the dog had predicted patrol patterns, the way Tucker himself had begun to sense things he shouldn't be able to sense, had begun to know things before they happened. "It's not fiction," Harrington said. "It's reality. And based on what you've told me, both the Soviets and elements within our own government are racing to perfect it, probably competing with each other even as they pretend to cooperate. That's what Omega was, a joint research program that both sides were planning to betray eventually." "The people at Blackridge," Tucker said, The ones in American uniforms speaking Russian. Which side are they on? Both. Neither. Does it matter? When this technology is perfected, whoever controls it will control the battlefield of the future, will control warfare itself. National allegiance becomes meaningless in the face of that kind of power. Tucker felt his consciousness fading again, the fever pulling him under. He grabbed Harrington's arm with desperate strength. You have to get this to Senator Jameson. You have to expose this. Promise me. Harrington took the cylinder carefully, reverently. I promise. But you need medical attention. There's a hospital in Charleston where I know a doctor who will ask no questions. No time, Tucker gasped. They're going to kill everyone in Ashford tomorrow. 237 people. You have to warn them. You have to stop it. I'll try, Harrington said, but Tucker could hear the doubt in his voice. How do you warn a town that the government is coming to kill them? Who would believe such an accusation? Tucker's vision was going dark. He reached down and pulled Whistler close, feeling the dog's small body against his chest. Take care of him, Tucker told Harrington. He's evidence. He's proof. Don't let them get him. Those were the last words Tucker remembered speaking. He woke 3 days later in a hospital bed in Charleston, West Virginia. Harrington was gone. Whistler was gone. The cylinder was gone. And standing at the foot of Tucker's bed, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with unmistakable military bearing, were two men who Tucker recognized immediately. They were the same men who had delivered Whistler in that wooden crate back in January. The same men he'd seen driving through the woods near Ashford. The men from military intelligence. Sergeant Tucker, one of them said with a cold smile. So glad you survived your unfortunate accident during training exercises. Colonel Dietrich sends his regards. Tucker's hand went to his side, searching for a weapon that wasn't there, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The other man shook his head slowly. Don't make this difficult. You're going to sign some papers, going to accept your medical discharge with full honors and a generous pension. Going to forget everything you think you saw at Black Ridge. And then you're going to live a long, quiet life and never speak of any of this again. And if I refuse? Tucker asked, knowing the answer. Then we'll have another tragic accident. Maybe a fire in this hospital. Terrible thing, fires. So many people could get hurt. Nurses, doctors, other patients. All because one sergeant couldn't accept the generous offer being extended to him. Tucker signed the papers. He took the discharge. He took the pension. He went home to Savannah and never spoke of Black Ridge to anyone for 43 years. But he followed the news. He watched, and he waited. On November 23, 1944, 1 week after Tucker's escape from Black Ridge, the town of Ashford, Virginia, was destroyed by what authorities called a catastrophic gas explosion in the abandoned mine shafts beneath the town. 237 people died. The town was permanently evacuated, the ruins buried under earth and concrete, declared too dangerous for habitation. The disaster made national news for 3 days, then was forgotten. Dr. Malcolm Harrington was never heard from again. Tucker searched for years, following rumors and whispers. Some said Harrington had made it to Senator Jameson's office. Others said he'd been found dead in a Washington, D.C. alley, apparent victim of a robbery. Others said he'd simply vanished, like so many people who knew too much, vanished in those days. And Whistler. Tucker never saw the terrier again. Never found out what happened to the dog who had saved his life, who had carried the evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American and Soviet power. Tucker lived for 68 more years after Blackridge. He married, had children, worked as a mechanic in Savannah, lived an outwardly normal life. But he never forgot. And as the decades passed, he began to see things that made him wonder if Omega had ever really ended, or if it had just evolved, grown more sophisticated, spread deeper into military and intelligence structures around the world. He noticed patterns, reports of military working dogs with unusual capabilities, dogs that seemed to predict enemy attacks before they happened, stories of enhanced animal intelligence programs at classified research facilities, whispers about frequency weapons and neurological warfare research that official sources vehemently denied existed. And he noticed the deaths. Researchers who died in car accidents, whistleblowers who committed suicide, journalists who suffered heart attacks while investigating classified military programs, always just plausible enough to avoid suspicion, always just convenient enough to silence someone who was asking the wrong questions. Tucker kept files, newspaper clippings, magazine articles, documents he obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, heavily redacted, but sometimes revealing glimpses of the truth in the spaces between the black ink. He built a case, slowly, carefully, over decades, waiting for the right moment to release it, waiting for someone who would listen, who would believe, who would act. That moment came in 1987. Tucker, now 85 years old and dying of cancer, contacted a young investigative journalist named Sarah Chen, who had been writing about Cold War-era military experiments. He gave her everything: the files, the testimony, the names, the dates, the places. Chen's initial article was published in the New York Times in March of 1988. It created a brief sensation. Congressional hearings were promised, investigations were announced, and then, 3 weeks after the article's publication, Sarah Chen died in a fire that destroyed her apartment building in Manhattan. 12 other people died in that fire. All of Chen's research materials were destroyed. The congressional hearings were quietly canceled. The investigations went nowhere. Tucker died 2 months later, in May of 1988. Natural causes, the death certificate said. But his children, cleaning out his house after the funeral, found his study had been ransacked. His files were gone. His decades of collected evidence had vanished. The story of Blackridge Station, of Operation Sentinel-I, of Field Test Omega, was never officially acknowledged. To this day, Pentagon records make no mention of the facility. The land where Blackridge once stood is now part of a national forest, closed to the public, patrolled by rangers who are actually hired security contractors with military backgrounds. And Ashford remains buried beneath 30 feet of earth and concrete, a town that officially never existed, 237 people whose deaths were declared an unfortunate accident and then forgotten by history. But Tucker's story didn't die with him. It survived in fragments, in whispers, in the testimony he gave to Chen before she died, in copies of documents that somehow escaped the purge. It survived in the memories of his children, who believed their father even when no one else would. It survived in the work of researchers and journalists who continued asking questions about Cold War military programs, even when those questions made them targets. And it survives in the dogs, the military working dogs who continue to demonstrate capabilities that seem to exceed normal canine intelligence. The dogs who predict attacks and sense dangers that their handlers can't explain. The dogs who sometimes, according to rumors that circulate in veteran communities, seem to communicate with their handlers in ways that go beyond training, beyond instinct, beyond anything that current science can explain. Some say Omega never ended. They say it just went deeper underground, became more classified, spread into black budget programs that congressional oversight committees don't even know exist. They say the technology Tucker saw at Blackridge was crude compared to what exists now, that neurological frequency manipulation has advanced to levels that would make the 1940s experiments look like primitive superstition. And some say Whistler is still alive. Not literally, of course. A dog couldn't live for 80 years, but that the program continued. That there are dogs out there right now who carry the legacy of what was done at Blackridge, who are part of an ongoing experiment that has been running continuously since the 1940s, passed down through generations of animals and handlers, refined and perfected with each iteration. Tucker believed, until the day he died, that the conspiracy was real, that it was still active, and that the people behind it would do anything to keep it secret. He believed that what he experienced at Blackridge was just one small piece of something much larger, much more dangerous, something that crossed national boundaries and political allegiances, something that served interests beyond any single government or ideology. He believed that someone, someday, would expose the truth, would bring justice for Ashford, would reveal what Omega really was and what it became. But he also believed that exposure would come at a terrible cost, that the forces protecting these secrets would kill thousands to keep them hidden, just as they had killed 237 people in a small Virginia town in 1944. As you sit there, watching this, reading about Wallace Tucker and Whistler and Blackridge Station, you might wonder if any of this is true. You might dismiss it as conspiracy theory, as paranoid fantasy, as the delusions of a traumatized veteran. That's what you're supposed to think. That's what they want you to think. But consider this. In 2019, the Department of Defense quietly acknowledged that it had operated classified research facilities during World War II that conducted experiments on both animals and humans without proper oversight or ethical review. The acknowledgement came buried in a 7,000-page budget document that almost no one read. No specific facilities were named, no specific programs were detailed, just a brief admission and a promise that all such activities had ceased decades ago. In 2022, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered references to something called Project Sentinel-I in files related to Army Veterinary Corps activities in 1944. The references were heavily redacted, but dates and locations matched Tucker's testimony. The Department of Defense refused to declassify any additional information, citing national security concerns for operations that allegedly ended 78 years ago. And in 2023, a small town in Western Virginia, previously known only as an abandoned mining settlement, was opened for archaeological study for the first time since World War II. The researchers found something strange beneath the earth and concrete that had covered the site for 8 decades. They found buildings, intact buildings with equipment still in place, equipment that included devices the researchers couldn't identify, devices that seemed designed for biological research, for neurological monitoring, for frequency transmission. The research was immediately halted. The site was closed again. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Rebecca Morse, gave one interview before disappearing. In that interview, she said, "We found things that shouldn't exist, technology that doesn't match the 1940s timeline. And we found remains, human remains, in the basements of buildings that were never supposed to have basements. The bodies showed signs of experimentation." Dr. Morse hasn't been seen or heard from since that interview aired. Her university says she took a leave of absence for personal reasons. Her family says they don't know where she is. Her colleagues won't talk about what they found at the site. The story of Whistler, of the burning tank, of the secrets hidden in that leather vest, is one of thousands of stories from the Second World War that never made it into official histories. Stories that were classified, buried, denied, and forgotten. But forgotten doesn't mean gone, and classified doesn't mean untrue. Somewhere, in a classified facility, in a black budget program that congressional oversight doesn't touch, the research continues. The dogs continue. The experimentation continues. And the people who protect these secrets are still watching, still listening, still ready to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Tucker knew this. Harrington knew this. Chen knew this. All the journalists and researchers and whistleblowers who died asking the wrong questions knew this. The question is, now that you know, what will you do? Will you dismiss it as fiction, as conspiracy, as impossible? That's the safe choice. That's the easy choice. Or will you start asking questions? Start looking for patterns. Start connecting the dots between military working dog programs and classified research and convenient accidents that silence inconvenient witnesses? The choice is yours. But remember Tucker's warning, given to Sarah Chen in one of their final conversations before her death. The truth is out there, but seeking it might cost you everything. Some secrets are protected by people who will burn down the world to keep them hidden. And if you start pulling at this thread, if you start unraveling this conspiracy, they will notice, and they will come for you. In a world where information is power, where technology advances faster than ethics can keep pace, where military advantage is worth any moral cost, is it really so impossible that experiments like Omega existed? That they might still exist? That dogs and humans and frequencies and neurological control could be combined into weapons that change the nature of warfare itself? Tucker believed until his dying day that what he experienced at Black Ridge was real, that Whistler was real, that the conspiracy was real and ongoing. He believed the evidence would eventually surface, that justice would eventually come, that the truth could not be buried forever. But he also believed that when the truth finally emerged, it would come at a terrible price. That exposure would trigger a purge, a sanitization on a scale that would make Ashford look like a minor incident. That the forces protecting these secrets would rather destroy everything than allow the truth to be known. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps he was paranoid. Perhaps trauma and burns and fever created false memories, transformed a tragic training accident into an elaborate conspiracy. Or perhaps Wallace Tucker was exactly what he claimed to be, a witness to something so terrible, so dangerous, so explosive, that powerful people spent decades and countless lives trying to erase all evidence of its existence. The official records say Black Ridge Station never existed. Say Operation Sentinel-I was never implemented. Say Field Test Omega was never conducted. Say Ashford was destroyed by a tragic gas explosion and nothing more. But Wallace Tucker's grandchildren still have copies of his files, hidden in safe deposit boxes in 3 different states. Sarah Chen's final article, the one she was writing when she died, still exists in fragments on backup servers her editors didn't know about. Dr. Rebecca Morse's preliminary report on the Ashford excavation site was uploaded to an encrypted cloud storage system before she disappeared. The evidence exists, scattered, hidden, protected by people who believe Tucker's story, who think the truth matters more than safety, who are willing to risk everything to expose what happened at Black Ridge and what might still be happening today. And somewhere, in a classified facility that doesn't officially exist, there might be a dog, a small terrier, or the descendant of a small terrier wearing a vest with compartments that hold secrets. A dog with eyes that are too intelligent, that can predict dangers before they happen, that is connected to its handler through frequencies that science doesn't officially acknowledge exist. The legacy of Whistler continues. The experiment continues. The conspiracy continues. And the people who protect these secrets are still watching, still listening, still ready to eliminate threats. Tucker's final words to his eldest son, spoken hours before his death in 1988, were, "I did my duty. I survived. I testified. I tried to warn people. But the truth is bigger than one man, bigger than one testimony. It takes courage to face what I saw. Most people don't have that courage. They'd rather believe the comfortable lie than accept the terrifying truth. But the truth doesn't care if you believe it or not. It's still true. And someday, somehow, it will come out. And when it does, pray to God that you're ready for what follows." In times of darkness, when conspiracies seem too vast to fight, when powerful forces appear unstoppable, when truth seems buried beyond recovery, we must remember that there is a power greater than any human conspiracy. There is a light that no darkness can extinguish. There is a truth that transcends all earthly secrets. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. In a world where men lie, where institutions corrupt, where power serves only itself, there is one source of absolute truth, one judge who cannot be deceived, one authority that no conspiracy can overcome. Tucker understood this in his final days. He understood that earthly justice might never come, but divine justice is inevitable and perfect. Whatever secrets remain buried at Blackridge, whatever experiments continue in classified facilities, whatever lies, protect the powerful. Remember that all things hidden will eventually be revealed. All things done in darkness will be brought into light, not by human action, but by the will of God. Put your faith not in governments or institutions or men, but in the eternal truth of Christ. The story of Whistler and Tucker is not over. It continues in every classified program that operates beyond oversight, in every secret that powerful people kill to protect, in every witness who is silenced, in every truth that is buried. But it also continues in every person who chooses to seek truth despite the cost, who chooses to speak truth despite the danger, who chooses to serve God's truth rather than human lies. The burning tank in that Polish forest, no, in that Virginia forest, holds secrets that may never be fully known. But the greater secret, the one that transcends all earthly conspiracies, is already known to those who have faith. In the end, truth prevails. In the end, justice comes. In the end, God's will is done. Until that day, the questions remain. Blackridge Station, never officially existing, lies somewhere beneath a Virginia forest. Operation Sentinel Eye, never officially acknowledged, might still operate under different names. Field Test Omega, never officially confirmed, could have evolved into programs that make Tucker's experience seem primitive. And Whistler's descendants, if they exist, might still be carrying secrets in their vests, still predicting dangers through impossible means, still serving a conspiracy that has survived for over 80 years. The truth is out there, buried but not destroyed. The evidence exists, scattered but not lost. The witnesses survive, silenced but not forgotten. And someday, someone will pull all the pieces together, will expose the full scope of what happened at Blackridge and what continues to happen today. When that day comes, the world will have to face a terrible truth about what governments do in the name of national security, about what sacrifices are acceptable in the pursuit of military advantage, about how many lives can be destroyed to protect a secret. Until then, remember Tucker. Remember Whistler. Remember Ashford. Remember that official denials don't equal truth. That classification doesn't equal justification. That national security doesn't excuse atrocity. And remember that in a world of conspiracies and lies and dangerous secrets, there is one truth that no power can suppress, one light that no darkness can extinguish. One authority that will ultimately judge all earthly actions. Turn to God, turn to Jesus Christ, and pray that when the full truth of programs like Omega is finally revealed, we have the strength and faith to face what was done in our names and the wisdom to ensure it never happens again.